I spent 3 months solo traveling Europe, and in today's video, I'm going to tell you everything that you need to know when it comes to planning your very own solo travel itinerary. When it comes to solo travel, you have the ultimate freedom to do what you want, whenever you want. You're not going to have to worry about catering for anyone else's needs. You're not going to have to worry about where to go, where to eat, and all the decisions you're going to make are just going to be for yourself. When you solo travel, you'll be in charge. Everything that you want to do is going to be controlled by no one but yourself. When you start planning your solo travel itinerary, there's going to be 3 key questions that you're going to need to answer. The first is where you want to go. The second is how long you have. And the third is your budget. If it's your first time in Europe, it's always a safe bet to stick to the bigger cities. Cities like London, Paris, Barcelona are very touristy, but they're touristy for a good reason. They have lots of things to offer. You're not going to have any problems with English or any language barriers, since there's going to be a lot of stuff catered for tourists. And this isn't necessarily a bad thing. Just because it's touristy, you shouldn't put these big cities off. They're touristy for a reason, because there's just so much going on and there's always new things that you can discover when you're visiting these cities. Another way to decide where you could possibly go is by checking out what your interests are. If there's certain things that you want to see or certain interests that you have, such as hiking or history for instance, you'll need to do some research before deciding on where you want to go. I often just look at different YouTube channels and get some inspiration online. If there's a place that I really want to go to, I'll usually just mark it down on Google Maps and I'll try and build an itinerary based off of those interests. Another easy way to decide where you want to go is to simply pull up Google Maps. When you have Google Maps open, you can just get a sense for where the cities are in Europe. And if you have a limited amount of time, you can sort of build an itinerary based off of the cities that are in close proximity to one another. When you're looking at cities, usually you can see the general area that they're all located within, because you want to try and be as efficient as possible when you're traveling, especially if you don't have much time, because you don't want to be spending a lot of your time traveling on planes or trains. The next question you're going to have to answer is how long do you actually have to travel? Now, if you're living in Europe currently, this is probably not a big concern, considering you could just take a weekend trip to another city as you felt like. But for those of us that are flying quite a big distance to come to Europe, it's best if you decide how long you have to spend in Europe, because you're going to be able to break down how long you want to spend in each smaller city. Personally, I'm a fan of slow travel, meaning I like to spend at least 5 days in bigger cities and at least 3 days in smaller cities, just because it lets you get a sense of what the cities actually have to offer. You won't feel a sense of being too rushed. You'll be able to see a lot of the sights that the cities have to offer. And usually if you have enough time in these cities, you can even fit in a day trip to another place if you felt like you've seen all that the city has to offer. Personally, I feel that it's quality over quantity when it comes to travel. It's the people you meet and the experiences that you share together that make visiting a place worthwhile and memorable. Sure, you could say you visited 5 different cities in 2 weeks, but did you really actually see anything or actually make new connections? Personally, I feel it's always the people you meet along the way that make the journey most memorable. Now, the last question you're going to have to determine is what your budget actually is. Your budget's going to play a big part in deciding where you go, what you do, where you eat, where you drink. So having a good ballpark figure of how much you have to spend is going to allow you to plan your trip in advance and make sure you're not ending up disappointed by not being able to do what you want to do when you actually get to Europe. Just for an example, personally, during my 3-month trip in Europe, I estimated I would spend around 100 Australian dollars a day. Now that factored in my accommodation, food, drinks, and expenses for one paid attraction like a museum or art gallery for instance. And personally, I felt that with that budget, I never felt that I was really missing out on anything. If I was ever wanting to go out or try a new restaurant, I always felt that that budget allowed me to be flexible. Now, there are going to be certain places in Europe which are more expensive. Places in Central Europe, for instance, such as Switzerland, the north of Italy, Germany, London, Paris, these are quite expensive cities compared to other cities such as the ones you may find in Eastern Europe, for example, such as Budapest, Prague, or Krakow. So, for example, a one-night accommodation that I had in a hostel in Paris was about 80 Australian dollars. And comparatively, I had a hostel in Krakow that offered free breakfast, free dinner, free beers for 25 Australian dollars a night. So it just goes to show that have some different expectations on prices, because it's going to be varying depending on which place you go to in Europe. Personally, I feel that the more affordable a place is, the more I can actually enjoy my time at that place. Whenever I'm in a more expensive place, there's a lot of sort of constraints at the back of my mind because I'm always thinking about my budget. I'm often limited on what I can do. Any restaurants that I particularly wanted to go to, or even a night out, can feel like a chore just because I'm always concerned about my budget at the back of my mind. So that's another reason to try and factor in cheaper destinations when it comes to planning your trip. The next question is going to be on whether you should pre-book all of your trip or if you build some spontaneity within your trip. There's pros and cons for each approach. So let's first talk about the benefits of actually pre-booking your whole trip. The first benefit is that you have pretty much no stress at all. If you've got your whole trip pre-planned, you pretty much have nothing to worry about. You'll know where to go, you'll know where to be, you have all your transport booked, you have all your accommodation booked, and if things were to go wrong, which is unlikely, at least you'll have some sense of where you need to go next and how you can actually get to that destination. Another benefit is that it will often work out much cheaper if you pre-book everything in advance. These things sort to get filled out pretty quick, especially during the summertime, because there's going to be a lot of demand and a lot of the good hostels, for example, do get booked out. So it's best, if you do want to get your spots secured, it's best to pre-book them as far in advance as you can. Carrying on from the last point, another big benefit of having everything pre-booked is that you often get the best availability. Now, a lot of times people want to socialize when they're solo traveling, and this often comes to staying in good, popular hostels. A lot of these hostels are usually booked weeks in advance, so having those pre-booked just going to ensure that you've got your spot confirmed and that you're not going to miss out on any good opportunities that might be awaiting for you in the city that you want to go to. Now, there are some drawbacks when it comes to having everything pre-booked, and the first one is that it pretty much locks you into your itinerary. I've had times where I've made good friends at hostels and been invited to join them for the next leg of their destination, but wasn't unfortunately able to because I had my next transport and accommodation booked, which was non-refundable. Small things like this can make your trip a bit frustrating, and it makes you miss out on good memories that you could have made if you had chosen to be spontaneous with your bookings. Another drawback is that you're not going to be able to plan well for unexpected events. For example, if you have a train delay and you need to check into your hostel by a certain time, you might not have the flexibility to do so because there are certain rules and restrictions when it comes to these sort of things. To get around this, just make sure that you have everything confirmed prior to arriving at your destination. You might want to contact hostels and tell them if there's any potential delays, or just always have a plan B in case you're not able to get to your destination on time. The last drawback of having everything pre-booked is that you might feel a bit of regret or bad decision making if you feel like you go to a place and you don't seem to enjoy it. If you go to a place and you feel it doesn't live up to your expectations, but you've booked maybe 5 nights worth of stay in that place, you're pretty much locked into those 5 nights unless you want to bear the expenses of going to another destination early. So in that regard, it can kind of lock you into your itinerary. You have little flexibility when it comes to actually moving around within your itinerary. Now, on the other hand, you have the option of not pre-booking your travel and being spontaneous with your trip. Now, the first benefit obviously is you have complete spontaneity when it comes to your trip. If you feel like you don't like a place, you can simply just pack up and go to the next spot. I often found I met a lot of travelers who were being spontaneous will get recommendations from other people, and I found that this was a good way to travel because you were able to get insights from travelers themselves on which places they actually enjoyed and which places they didn't enjoy. Personally, I also feel if you do allow a bit of spontaneity into your travel and do things just because you want to, it makes your travel just feel much more worthwhile and authentic compared to if you had pre-planned everything far in advance. The next benefit of being spontaneous is that it's going to allow you to become a lot more confident and self-reliant when it comes to travel. I know a lot of people have hopes of trying to get more independent or self-reliant when they're solo traveling. So putting yourself in the deep end when it comes to traveling is a good way to get started on that journey. I know before I started traveling, I always wanted to get out of my comfort zone and just try and get into more difficult situations so I could see how I reacted in these situations. And by making a trip spontaneous, you can always try and incorporate that within your trip. You'll be able to see how you make decisions last minute. You'll be able to see how you react if things don't go to plan. And overall, I feel that it's just a very good way to just get out of your comfort zone and see how you deal in difficult situations. Now, the next one you can kind of say is a bit controversial, but I have experienced it and have seen other travelers experience this as well, and that is that you might miss out on potentially life-changing experiences if you have everything pre-planned. I've heard stories of people meeting their girlfriend or boyfriend on a trip by either just meeting at a hostel and then deciding to carry on their trip together. So if you had, in that instance, pre-planned everything and weren't able to go along with that plan, who knows what you might miss out on. Sure, it sounds like a far-fetched idea, but if you were in that situation, you would want to have all the options available to yourself to do whatever you can to travel with that person and see where it leads to. Now, there are quite a few drawbacks to being spontaneous when you travel, but I do feel that these are quite obvious, so we won't spend too much time on discussing these. The first is that you're not guaranteed anything. Hostels, good trains at good times, good transport, even attractions can get booked out if you're not planning them far in advance. So just keep that in mind. If you are deciding to be spontaneous, you might not guarantee yourself a spot at the places you want to go. Another drawback is that it's just going to work out more expensive if you're being spontaneous. Just by the rules of supply and demand, anything booked last minute is going to be much more expensive compared to if you had booked it weeks or even months in advance. I've seen hostel prices go up to double when I have seen them at last minute prices. So if you are on a bit of a budget, just factor that in if you are deciding to be a bit spontaneous with your trip. And the last drawback that you might experience with being spontaneous is that you might feel a bit of regret or disappointment that you don't get to see everything that you want to see. I know a lot of people travel with the intention of going to a city and having a tick list for seeing all the certain things within a city. And if you're that kind of person and you want to check off that you've done everything that that city has to offer, you might feel a bit of regret if you don't do a bit of pre-planning. I know that when I get to a city, I try and tick off all of the major sites on the first day that I'm there, just so I can relax in the upcoming days and see things at my own pace. So keep that in mind if you are deciding to be a bit spontaneous with your trip. Now, a lot of people take into consideration the idea of safety and how big of an impact it has when it comes to solo travel. And it is true that safety is something that should be considered, but I can say for a fact, it shouldn't be the be-all end-all when it comes to considering the idea of solo travel. Personally, I've never encountered any bad situations or any situations where I felt that I was in danger, but I have heard stories where people have experienced some negative things, so it is good to go over this and discuss what safety considerations need to be taken. A big safety concern I know a lot of people have when they're solo traveling is that they're gonna be pickpocketed or robbed. And I can just say for a fact that there's nothing stopping that from happening to you in your hometown. Just don't be stupid, exercise common sense, don't walk down dark alleys at night, don't get drunk, don't leave your group. Things like this are just common sense, and I feel that they'll go a long way in just making sure that your trip is safe when you are traveling. Another safety concern that people have is that hostels are unsafe or that you're going to have your stuff robbed. I've stayed in over 30 hostels and I have never experienced or heard of anything bad happening to anyone. All hostels have locks and padlocks available, so there's no reason to get your stuff stolen unless someone is trying to forcibly break into your locker. Once again, just don't be stupid, don't leave your stuff lying around when you're not there. Don't flaunt any expensive stuff that you might have, like large cameras, laptops, and just exercise some common sense and you'll be fine. Now, on the topic of hostels, I know girls in particular have a sort of fear of staying in mixed dorms because of creeps or guys that might be just trying to hit on them, for example. But I can't really speak on this because I'm not a girl, but from what I've heard from other girls traveling is that they often try and stay in female-only dorms when they are traveling. And if there's not the option for female-only dorms, then they can stay in mixed dorms. In the mixed dorms that I've stayed at, there's always a mix of guys and girls, so it's extremely rare that there will be a situation where you're the only girl in the room. And if that were to arise, you can just simply ask the hostel staff and they'll be able to accommodate you into another room if there is one available. Now, when it comes to solo traveling, there's going to be some challenges that you're inevitably going to face. The biggest challenge that people think solo travelers face is that of loneliness. And to be honest, I can tell you for a fact that I feel that this is actually quite the opposite. If you are staying in hostels during your solo travels, it's literally impossible not to meet people and interact with others. Just by the nature of staying in dorm rooms and doing group activities, you're always going to be meeting new people on a day-to-day basis, and there's going to be actually very little solo time that you're going to have on your solo trip. As long as you put yourself out there and try and make friends, people are going to be very friendly back, and you're going to have a great time and meet a lot of new people. So if your fear is that you're not going to be able to make friends, or you're just going to be alone the whole time, don't think of it like this at all. It's actually going to be quite the opposite. I've honestly made more friends solo traveling than I have throughout my whole high school and university years. Now, that's not to say that every single hostel that you stay at is going to be social. There are hostels that are a bit more just like hotels with bunks, meaning that a lot of people are just staying there and have no really any desire to socialize. So what I usually do in these situations is I'd still be happy and talkative with other people, but if they don't reciprocate, then that's all well and good. You can just simply do things at your own pace. If I'm ever in that situation, I'd usually just put my headphones in, go for a walk, and just take the time to spend by myself. Another challenge people often face is that there's going to be a language barrier when they're traveling, especially in Europe. If you're in big cities like Berlin, Paris, Barcelona, there's a lot of tourists at these places, so having any concerns regarding non-English speaking is going to be very little concern unless you go to smaller towns. For example, if you're going to Germany, I found it helps if you learn how to say hello, please, thanks, and do you speak English in German. Not only does this make the people in the town appreciate your efforts a lot more, but it's just gonna make you feel more appreciative of the place that you're at. You'll feel like you're trying to embrace the culture, and it's just gonna make your trip a lot more enjoyable. Now, socializing and making friends is a fear that a lot of people have, especially if they're introverted and they have the idea of wanting to solo travel. I personally was and still think I am quite introverted. However, when you solo travel, you realize that people don't know your past. If you're an introverted person by nature, sure, people back home know that you're introverted, but the people that you're going to be meeting on your solo travels only know you from that first moment of meeting them. So you could technically be whoever you want to be. If you're introverted and want to be extroverted, you can be extroverted. If you're extroverted and you want to be introverted, you can be introverted. You can be pretty much whoever you want to be when you're solo traveling, and that's one of the greatest strengths I find of solo traveling, is that there's no limitation on who you can be because no one knows your past. Also, keep in mind that if you are introverted and do stay in hostels, just by the nature of staying in hostels, you're going to be meeting a lot of new people. And if you are putting yourself out there, it's going to be very easy for you to socialize and make new friends. And just by doing this often and on a repetitive basis, you'll naturally become more talkative and outgoing. Also, keep in mind that a lot of hostels organize activities which are done in groups, like pub crawls or game nights, and during that time you're going to have a lot of opportunities to make friends. And the hostel staff are often very nice and inclusive, and they try and get everyone involved. So don't worry if you are introverted and don't want to make the first move. You'll have people there that will help you ease into socializing, so don't be afraid. Finally, if you are on the fence about solo travel, I would recommend just do it 100%. You're not going to know what you're missing out on if you don't take the chance. Money will come back, but time and priceless memories won't. So if you are on the fence, just do it and you won't regret it at all. I hope this video helped, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.